Welcome back to the Sleepy Poker Masterclass Beginner to Master. In this 7th lesson, we'll study the art of bluffing and semi-bluffing in Texas Hold'em. Bluffing is one of poker's most misunderstood skills, part strategy, part psychology, and part mathematics. You'll learn how to recognize the right boards, opponents, and moments to bluff, and how to balance your betting patterns so you remain unpredictable. By the end of this lesson, you'll understand how to turn selective aggression into a powerful weapon at the table. Chapter 1. Why Bluffing Matters. Poker would be an easy game if players always bet only when they had the best hand. Every pot would simply go to whoever held the strongest cards, and the rest would fold quietly. But that version of poker would be predictable, and predictable players are easy to defeat. Bluffing exists to prevent that. It gives life to the game, introducing uncertainty, balance, and opportunity. At its heart, bluffing is not about trickery for its own sake. It is about strategy. When you bluff, you make your opponents confront doubt. You tell a believable story that forces them to question the value of their own hands. By adding the possibility that you might not actually have what you represent, you make it dangerous for opponents to fold too much or to call too often. This tension keeps poker balanced and dynamic. If you never bluff, your value bets lose power. Imagine you bet every time you have a strong hand and check whenever you miss. Before long, everyone at the table will know that your bets mean strength and your checks mean weakness. They will fold when you bet and attack when you check. You will win small pots and lose large ones. Bluffing prevents that pattern. It protects your strong hands by making your weak ones look similar. The best bluffers do not rely on theatrics. They rely on logic and consistency. A good bluff fits naturally within the story of the hand. If you raised before the flop, continued on the flop, and now bet on a dry turn, your opponents must consider that you could easily have connected. The credibility of your line, not your acting skills, drives success. Bluffing also magnifies fold equity, the value gained when opponents lay down better hands. Each time you cause someone to fold a winner, you gain invisible profit. Over hundreds of sessions, these moments add up to significant earnings. The math supports this. If your bluffs succeed often enough to cover their cost, they are profitable even without strong cards. Of course, bluffing can be overused. Random aggression turns predictable in a different way. Opponents simply call you down. The art lies in moderation. Bluff often enough to stay balanced, but not so often that you lose credibility. In short, bluffing matters because it transforms poker from a game of pure cards into a game of decisions. It allows weak hands to win, protects strong hands from exploitation, and rewards players who think beyond what they can see. Without bluffs, poker is mechanical. With them, it becomes an intricate contest of logic and nerve, the very reason players keep coming back to the table. Chapter 2. Defining a bluff. Before we can master bluffing, we must define it clearly. A bluff is any bet or raise made with a hand that expects to win only if the opponent folds. It is the act of representing strength when you have weakness, a way to claim a pot without showing the best cards. In contrast, a value bet invites a call because you believe you are ahead. The difference is intent. There are two main types of bluffs, pure bluffs and semi-bluffs. A pure bluff has no realistic chance to win if called. It relies entirely on fold equity. For example, betting the river with 7 high on an ace king king queen 10 board is pure bluffing. A semi-bluff, on the other hand, has potential to improve. When you hold a flush draw or an open-ended straight draw, your bet pressures opponents while keeping live equity in reserve. If they fold, you win now. If they call, you still have a path to victory. Understanding this distinction helps shape correct aggression. Pure bluffs should be rare and timed carefully, ideal when your range appears strong and your opponent's appears weak. Semi-bluffs are more frequent because they carry built-in safety through possible improvement. A good bluff must also make sense within the hand's narrative. Your actions across the pre-flop, flop, turn, and river must be consistent with the hand you claim to represent. Random betting patterns fail because they tell no believable story. For instance, if you limp pre-flop and then suddenly shove on an ace-high flop, your story collapses unless you are known for unorthodox play. Bluffing also has a mathematical component. Each time you bet, you risk a certain amount to win what is already in the pot. If your opponent folds often enough, your bluff shows profit over time. For example, if you bet 50 into a pot of 100, you are risking 50 to win 150. You need your opponent to fold at least 1/3 of the time for the play to break even. Anything higher becomes profitable. Finally, remember that bluffing is not guesswork. It is a structured part of poker theory, an intentional decision that supports your value betting range. By blending bluffs and value bets in similar proportions and sizes, you become unreadable. Opponents cannot easily tell whether you want a call or a fold, forcing them into mistakes. Bluffing begins with this definition: betting not because you must, but because you can. Once you understand its purpose and structure, every future lesson, from psychology to semi-bluffs, builds naturally on that foundation. Chapter 3: The Psychology of Bluffing. Bluffing may look like a simple act of deception, but in truth, it is a study of human behavior. Every decision at the poker table, calling, folding, betting, or raising, flows from a mix of logic and emotion. Understanding that emotional balance is what turns bluffing from a gamble into a skill. The first psychological principle of bluffing is credibility. Your opponents must believe the story you are telling through your actions. Confidence, composure, and consistency create that credibility. When you act too quickly, talk too much, or show visible excitement, your actions appear unnatural. Calm, deliberate motion invites belief. The best bluffers project the same demeanor, whether they hold the nuts or complete air. A second key is projection. Players often read you not by what you say, but by how you behave between decisions. Breathing patterns, timing, and posture all send signals. A sudden change, like leaning forward, grabbing chips too early, or staring too long, can give away uncertainty. In live games, controlling these cues matters as much as the bet itself. Online, projection comes through timing. Acting instantly in some spots and hesitating in others can create patterns sharp opponents will detect. Next is emotional control. Bluffing works best when emotions are quiet. Fear of being caught makes bets timid. Frustration turns them reckless. The ideal mindset is steady confidence, accepting that bluffing is a tool, not a personal risk. If you treat each bluff as an investment rather than a statement of ego, the outcomes stop affecting your composure. Bluffing also requires reading emotion in others. Watch how your opponents handle success and pressure. Do they sit taller after winning a pot? Do they freeze when unsure? Do they breathe differently after calling reluctantly? These cues reveal when they feel strong or weak. Many successful bluffs occur not because of the board, but because of what an opponent's behavior suggests. Another psychological factor is reputation. Every bluff you make shapes how others see you. If you have been quiet and selective for an hour, your sudden aggression will be respected. If you have been wild and unpredictable, the same bluff will attract calls. Managing that reputation, your table image, is an ongoing process that determines how believable you are in future hands. Finally, psychology connects directly to math and discipline. Even perfect acting fails if the numbers are wrong. The best bluffers blend the psychological and the mathematical. They pick moments where fold equity supports the story their behavior tells. They bluff because logic allows it, not because emotion demands it. Bluffing psychology is about balance. It is the meeting point of composure, observation, and calculation. When your mind is calm, your story believable, and your reads accurate, bluffing stops being a gamble and becomes an expression of control. Chapter 4: The Power of Fold Equity. Fold equity is one of the most powerful and least understood concepts in poker. It is the invisible profit that comes from making your opponent fold a better hand. Every time you bet, your potential winnings come from two sources: your actual hand equity, which is your chance of winning if called, and your fold equity, which is your chance of winning immediately when your opponent folds. Combined, they define the total value of aggression. To calculate fold equity conceptually, think about what happens when you bet. Suppose the pot is $100 and you bet 50. If your opponent folds even 1/3 of the time, your bluff breaks even. That's because you risk 50 to win 150, and 1/3 of 150 equals 50. Any fold frequency above 1/3 turns a profit. You don't need to win every time, just often enough to make your risk worthwhile. This principle explains why aggressive players often outperform passive ones, even when their cards are worse. They collect the pots that go uncontested. Every fold they induce adds invisible earnings that don't appear on any scoreboard but matter in the long run. Fold equity also affects semi-bluffs. Suppose you have a flush draw with about 35% equity if called. If your opponent will fold 30% of the time, your total expected value rises dramatically. Even when you miss your draw, the times they fold make the bluff profitable. This combination, some chance to improve and some chance to win immediately, creates hands that thrive on aggression. However, fold equity is not guaranteed. It depends on opponent type and situation. Tight players give you more fold equity because they dislike risking chips without strong hands. Loose players offer less, as they call frequently and refuse to back down. Board texture also matters. On a dry board like Ace-7-2, your continuation bet represents strength and earns folds. On a connected board like 10-9-8, with two suits, opponents are more likely to call, shrinking your fold equity. Bet sizing directly affects fold equity. Larger bets make folding easier for your opponent, but risk more of your stack. Smaller bets risk less, but may look weak. The best bluff sizes balance pressure with value. Large enough to convince, small enough to repeat profitably. Fold equity transforms poker into a game of controlled aggression. It rewards precision, not recklessness. Understanding it means knowing when your story and math align to create invisible profit. Once you can estimate fold equity intuitively, you stop fearing bluffs and start using them as deliberate, profitable tools. Chapter 5: Bluffing with a Plan. Bluffing without a plan is one of the most common mistakes in poker. Many players decide to bluff in the moment. driven by impulse or frustration, rather than strategy. A successful bluff, however, follows a structured plan based on range, position, opponent tendencies, and board texture. It tells a believable story from start to finish. Every bluff begins before the chips go into the pot. Ask yourself 3 questions. What hand am I representing? What story does the board allow me to tell? And how likely is my opponent to believe that story? If you cannot answer those questions clearly, it is not the right time to bluff. For example, suppose you raise pre-flop with ace-king, and the flop comes 9-6-3 rainbow. You missed the board completely, but this is still a good bluffing opportunity. The board is dry, meaning your opponent's range rarely connects strongly. Because you were the pre-flop aggressor, your continuation bet represents over pairs like aces, kings, or queens. Your story is believable because it aligns with your earlier action. Now imagine a different flop, 10, 9, 8, with 2 suited cards. Bluffing here makes little sense because that board favors your opponent's calling range. They can have straights, 2 pairs, or strong draws. Your story does not fit the texture, and your bluff would likely fail. A plan means recognizing which boards belong to you and which belong to them. A good bluffing plan also includes exit points. You should know in advance when to stop applying pressure. If you continuation bet the flop and get called, plan what to do on the turn. Will you fire again on scare cards that help your story? Or will you shut down if the board becomes more dangerous? Without that roadmap, you may bluff multiple streets blindly and lose unnecessary chips. Timing is another key part of the plan. Bluffing early in a session can establish an image of activity that gets paid off later with value hands. Bluffing against tired or frustrated opponents near the end of a session can exploit mental fatigue. The timing of when you bluff often matters as much as the bet itself. Finally, discipline binds the plan together. Even the best constructed bluff can fail when an opponent refuses to fold. Accepting that outcome calmly keeps your image strong and your decision process intact. The goal is not to win every bluff, but to execute sound ones consistently. When you bluff with a plan, you act from logic, not emotion. Each street follows a purpose, each action builds credibility, and every bet contributes to a coherent story. That structure turns a risky move into a controlled weapon, one that makes you respected at the table, even when the cards do not cooperate. Chapter 6: Pure Bluffs versus Semi-Bluffs. Not all bluffs are created equal. Some rely entirely on the opponent folding, others have a backup plan in case they are called. Understanding the difference between pure bluffs and semi-bluffs helps you choose the right moments to apply each. A pure bluff is a bet made with no chance of improving if called. It wins only when your opponent folds. For example, betting the river with 7 high on a board of ace, king, king, queen, and 10 is a pure bluff. You have no realistic way to win if someone calls. Because pure bluffs depend entirely on fold equity, they must be chosen carefully. You need the right opponent, the right story, and the right board. Pure bluffs work best when the board heavily favors your perceived range. If you raised pre-flop and the flop comes ace-high with disconnected cards, your continuation bet represents strength. Your opponent, seeing few ways their hand can improve, may fold small pairs or medium holdings. This is how pure bluffs survive, through credibility, not luck. A semi-bluff is different. It is a bet made with a drawing hand that can improve if called. Common examples include flush draws, straight draws, or hands like ace-queen on a king-high flop. Semi-bluffs are safer, because even if your opponent calls, you still have outs to win. You combine fold equity with actual hand equity. For instance, if you hold 10 of hearts and 9 of hearts on a flop of queen, jack, 2 with 2 hearts, you have both a straight draw and a flush draw, a strong semi-bluff opportunity. If your opponent folds, you win immediately. If they call, you still have roughly 50% equity to improve. This mathematical safety net makes semi-bluffs a central part of profitable aggression. Another advantage of semi-bluffing is image control. By betting draws aggressively, you create balance in your range. Opponents cannot tell whether your bet means strength or a draw. Later, when you bet with a made hand, they are more likely to pay you off because they have seen you bet with less. Pure bluffs are high-risk, high-reward plays. Semi-bluffs are steady, mathematically supported tools. The art of poker lies in mixing both, using semi-bluffs frequently to apply safe pressure and pure bluffs selectively to maximize fold equity. When combined, they form the backbone of a balanced, unpredictable strategy that keeps opponents guessing. Chapter 7. Choosing the right spots. Bluffing successfully is not about being fearless. It is about being selective. The best players do not bluff often, they bluff well. Each attempt is chosen with care, based on board texture, opponent tendencies, position, and timing. Learning to recognize the right spots turns bluffing from a guess into a calculation. The first step is to look at board control. Good bluffing spots appear when the board favors your perceived range more than your opponent's. Suppose you raise pre-flop, and the flop comes ace-7-2. That board hits the range of the pre-flop raiser, the player who could easily hold strong aces or overpairs. It is a poor board for the caller, who usually holds medium-strength hands or speculative connectors. This imbalance makes bluffing effective. Now imagine a flop of 8-7-6 with 2 suited cards. That board connects heavily with the caller's range. Bluffing there is dangerous. Choosing spots means recognizing who the texture truly benefits. Next, consider position. Bluffing works far better when you act last. The advantage of position is information. You see how your opponents behave before making your decision. If everyone checks to you, their weakness invites aggression. Acting last also lets you control the pot size and choose when to shut down. Out of position, bluffing becomes guesswork. In position, it becomes strategy. Another key factor is opponent type. Bluffing a tight player is smart because they fold often. Bluffing a loose player is risky because they call too much. Bluffing a tilted or emotional opponent may backfire entirely, since frustration leads to unpredictable calls. You should always aim your bluffs at opponents who can actually fold. Timing is equally important. Early in a hand, a small continuation bet can pick up a pot with minimal risk. Later in a hand, when more money is in play, your story must be stronger. A river bluff with no logical foundation will almost always fail. Choose spots where the narrative makes sense from pre-flop to river, where your aggression fits the hand's natural progression. Table dynamics also play a role. If you have been quiet for several orbits, opponents will give your bet more respect. If you have been betting frequently, your credibility is lower. Sometimes the best bluff is not a single move, but a setup, playing conservatively for several hands to prepare for the one that counts. Finally, trust discipline over emotion. Bluffing just because you feel like it almost never works. The right spot is one that checks all boxes. Your story is credible. Your opponent is capable of folding, and the math supports your risk. Every other time, patience will earn more than impulse. Selecting bluffing spots with care is what separates thoughtful players from gamblers. The best bluffers wait for the right combination of position, texture, and timing, and when that window opens, they strike confidently, knowing both logic and psychology are on their side. Chapter 8. Board Texture Analysis. No concept influences bluffing success more than board texture. Board texture describes how well the community cards connect with typical hand ranges. Some boards are dry, meaning they are disconnected and unlikely to hit opponents' hands. Others are wet, filled with connected and suited cards that create multiple draws. Reading this texture determines whether your bluff makes sense or fails immediately. Dry boards are a bluffer's friend. A flop like Ace-7-2 Rainbow is difficult for most players to connect with. If you are the pre-flop raiser, a bet here represents many strong hands, Ace-King, Ace-Queen, or overpairs like kings or queens. Since your opponent rarely hits, their most common holdings are small pairs or unpaired Broadway cards. A simple continuation bet on this board often wins immediately. The board texture supports your story of strength. Now contrast that with a wet board, such as Jack-10-9 with two suited cards. That texture heavily favors the caller's range. They can have straights, pairs plus draws, or even combo draws. Your continuation bet will be called frequently, and bluffing becomes much riskier. On these boards, checking or taking a smaller stab can be better than large, costly aggression. Semi-wet boards fall somewhere between. A flop like King-9-4 with two suits offers middle ground, some strong-made hands and some draws. Bluffing can still work, but you must use selective aggression, targeting opponents who are likely to miss the specific combinations this board connects with. Another key factor is card removal. When you hold certain cards, they reduce the likelihood that your opponent has specific strong hands. For example, bluffing on an ace-high board is safer when you hold one ace yourself. It becomes part of your blocker advantage, which we'll explore later in this lesson. Also, pay attention to turn and river textures. Many players continue bluffing blindly when the board changes unfavorably. A flush completing, or a straight arriving, should make you reconsider. On the other hand, scare cards, like an ace on the turn, can increase your fold equity because they favor your perceived range. Bluffing without reading board texture is like driving without a map. You might reach your destination, but it will be by luck, not design. By recognizing which boards belong to you and which favor your opponent, you refine your aggression into precision. Board texture turns random betting into intelligent storytelling, and mastering it is one of the clearest markers of poker maturity. Chapter 9. Representing Strong Hands. Every effective bluff tells a believable story. At its core, bluffing is a performance of logic. You are representing a hand that fits the actions you have taken. When your bets follow a narrative that makes sense, opponents feel pressure to fold. When the story is inconsistent, they call you down easily. The first rule of representing strength is consistency across streets. Imagine you raise pre-flop from early position, and the flop comes King-7-3 Rainbow. You continuation bet. On the turn, a harmless 2 falls. If you bet again, your line represents strong kings, overpairs, or sets. The story fits your previous action and the board texture. But if you check suddenly on the turn and then shove on the river, the story becomes confused. Sudden changes in aggression without logical cause make your bluff less believable. Your bet sizing also communicates strength. Players expect big hands to bet confidently. However, consistency is more important than size. If your value bets are usually half pot, then your bluffs should match that pattern. When your sizing aligns across both types, opponents cannot easily distinguish between real strength and manufactured pressure. An unbalanced player who bets large only when bluffing or small only when strong becomes readable. Board texture shapes what kinds of hands you can credibly represent. On an ace-high flop, you can tell a believable story of having ace-king or ace-queen. On a coordinated board like 10-9-8, representing top set or an overpair is harder because most players would bet cautiously with those hands. Good bluffers consider what story the board allows before acting. Another important tool is continuity through the hand. If you raised pre-flop, bet the flop, and barrel the turn, you are continuing to represent a premium hand. Each street reinforces your image of strength. Stopping that story too early can make opponents sense weakness. However, overextending into illogical aggression, like firing large on a river that completes every draw, undoes the story entirely. Know when to stop telling the tale. You can also use timing and demeanor to strengthen your representation. Taking too long before betting often suggests indecision. Acting quickly, with confidence, reinforces believability. In live play, consistent chip movement and calm posture make your line appear genuine. Online, steady timing and similar bet patterns serve the same purpose. Finally, representing strong hands is about credibility over time. If you build a reputation for straightforward play, your sudden aggression will command respect. If you have been bluffing frequently, the same line loses authority. The strongest representations come from players who mix both seamlessly, showing value when they have it, and maintaining composure when they don't. Bluffing without a story is noise. Bluffing with a story creates tension, doubt, and respect. The more coherent your narrative, the more likely opponents are to fold, even with decent hands. In poker, logic persuades as effectively as chips, and consistency is what makes logic believable. Chapter 10. Bluffing in Position. Position is the bluffer's best friend. Acting last provides information, control, and flexibility, three pillars that make bluffs safer and more profitable. When you are in position, you can see what your opponents do before deciding, which lets you tailor your actions precisely. The first advantage is information. When your opponents check, hesitate, or bet small, you gain insight into their range. A check usually signals weakness or caution. A small probe bet may indicate uncertainty. Each detail refines your picture of their hand. With that information, your bluff becomes targeted rather than blind. You attack weakness backed by logic, not guesswork. The second advantage is pot control. In position, you determine the final size of each street's wager. If your bluff is challenged, you can choose to slow down or check behind, avoiding unnecessary losses. This control protects your stack and lets you apply measured aggression rather than reckless force. The third benefit is pressure through presence. Acting last allows you to threaten future bets. Even when you check, opponents know you can bet on the next street, which forces them to play defensively. This invisible leverage increases your fold equity without even placing a chip in the pot. Consider a practical example. You raise pre-flop with Queen-Jack suited from the button. The big blind calls, and the flop comes Ace-7-2. Your opponent checks. This is a great bluffing opportunity. The board favors your perceived range as the pre-flop aggressor, and your opponent's check shows weakness. A simple continuation bet often wins. If called, you can evaluate the turn and either continue on scare cards or shut down if conditions worsen. That flexibility is the heart of positional play. In position, timing tells also work in your favor. You can take a few moments to read your opponent's response before acting. Their breathing, chip handling, or betting rhythm might reveal whether they are comfortable. The more information you gather, the more accurate your bluffing decisions become. Bluffing in position also helps you manage equity realization. When you have a drawing hand, such as a semi-bluff, position ensures you see more cards and realize your equity fully. Out of position, opponents can deny you that chance with large bets. In position, you decide whether to check, call, or raise, controlling when and how you invest. Finally, position allows you to end hands on your own terms. If opponents check to you on the river, your bluff can close the action immediately. Even small bets gain power because you represent a complete story from start to finish. In poker, knowledge is power, and position provides both knowledge and initiative. It transforms bluffs from desperate moves into calculated plays backed by logic, awareness, and control. Mastering positional bluffing is one of the most efficient ways to increase both confidence and profit. Chapter 11. Bluffing Out of Position. Bluffing out of position is one of the most difficult skills in poker. When you act before your opponent, you must commit to your decision without knowing how they will respond. This uncertainty makes every bluff riskier. Still, with discipline and structure, it can be done profitably. The first challenge is information disadvantage. Out of position, you act blindly compared to your opponent. They get to see what you do first, and they can use that information to counter you. Because of this, you must bluff less often and choose your moments carefully. When you do bluff, it should be with purpose, representing a narrow, credible range that fits the action and the board. A common out-of-position bluff is the check raise. This move allows you to represent strong hands, even after checking first. Suppose you defend from the big blind with 9-8 suited, and the flop comes King 7-6. You check, your opponent bets, and you raise. This play tells a convincing story of flopped straights, two pairs or sets. It also gives you fold equity immediately, while allowing semi-bluffs with draws. The check raise works best on boards that favor your range, not your opponent's. Barreling from out of position, betting multiple streets, requires caution. When you act first, opponents can trap you by calling down with strong hands. Only continue your bluff when the next card improves your story or creates scare cards for your opponent. For example, if you continuation bet a queen high flop and the turn brings an ace, a second barrel makes sense because the ace strengthens your perceived range. But if the turn brings a low card that connects with your opponent's calling range, slow down. Pot control is critical. Because you lack information, avoid building large pots with weak or uncertain holdings. Smaller bets can still apply pressure without committing too many chips. For instance, a 1/3 or half pot bluff keeps your line believable, while leaving room to retreat if raised. Over-betting out of position often exposes desperation rather than confidence. Timing and demeanor also matter. Acting too quickly signals discomfort. Taking a consistent calm rhythm for all decisions keeps your range hidden. Strong players notice hesitation and use it as a cue to call you down. When bluffing from early position in multi-way pots, it's usually better to avoid aggression altogether. With more players involved, fold equity drops sharply. Wait for boards that clearly favor your range, or for spots where your opponent's tendencies justify the risk. The key to out-of-position bluffing is precision over volume. You will bluff less often, but each attempt should be well structured, backed by logic, and supported by fold equity. Mastering these situations builds resilience. Even when the positional odds are against you, you can still create pressure through calculated, believable aggression. Chapter 12. Bet Sizing for Bluffs. Bet sizing is the language of poker. Every chip you push forward sends a message about the strength of your hand. For a bluff to succeed, your message must be clear, logical, and believable. The right size makes opponents fold hands they would otherwise call. The wrong size exposes your weakness or risks too much for too little gain. The first rule is match your bluffs to your value bets. If you always bet small with weak hands and large with strong ones, observant opponents will catch on. Your bet sizing should be consistent across both categories. A half-pot bet that looks natural for a value hand should look identical when bluffing. Consistency hides your intentions. Second, understand risk versus reward. A smaller bluff needs to work more often than a larger one, but it costs less to fail. A half-pot bet risks 1 unit to win 2, requiring folds 1/3 of the time to break even. A full pot bet risks 1 unit to win 1, needing 50% folds. A double pot shove risks more, but only needs to work about 67% of the time. The math reveals that large bluffs are powerful but costly. Choose sizes that achieve the fold frequency you need, while staying efficient. Board texture also guides sizing. On dry boards like Ace-7-2 Rainbow, a small bluff often gets the job done, because there are few draws for opponents to continue with. On wet boards like Jack-10-9 with 2 suits, a larger bet is necessary to push out strong draws and made hands. Your bet size should reflect the danger of the board, bigger when opponents have equity, smaller when they don't. Consider the opponent's perspective. Against tight players, smaller bluffs can succeed because they fold easily. Against looser opponents, larger bets may be required to apply enough pressure. Always size bluffs based on how your opponent interprets them, not just your own comfort. Multi-street bluffing adds complexity. When planning to fire 2 or 3 barrels, think ahead about stack depth. If your flop bet is too large, you may leave yourself without room to continue later. Balanced bluff sizing considers not only the current street, but the entire hand's potential progression. One advanced concept is over-betting, betting more than the pot. Used sparingly, overbets create maximum fold equity because they pressure even strong hands. Overbetting works best on rivers where your line strongly represents a polarized range, either the nuts or nothing. When executed correctly, these bluffs can win massive pots with minimal risk of being called. Finally, stay emotionally neutral. Some players increase their bet size out of frustration or fear, revealing weakness instead of strength. Your sizing choices should always serve your story, not your emotions. When you control your bet sizes with intention, every bluff becomes part of a coherent strategy. Opponents can read uncertainty, but they cannot read consistency. Through thoughtful sizing, you turn your chips into persuasion, quiet, deliberate, and profitable. Chapter 13. Bluffing Frequencies. Bluffing is not about how bold you are. It's about how balanced you are. Every strong player develops a sense of rhythm between bluffs and value bets. This balance is called bluffing frequency, and it's one of the most misunderstood aspects of poker strategy. Bluff too often, and opponents call you down. Bluff too little, and they fold every time you bet. The key is finding the middle ground that keeps them uncertain. The first step is understanding why frequency matters. Poker is a game of incomplete information. Your opponents can't see your cards, but they can observe patterns. If your betting behavior becomes predictable, they can exploit it. Bluffing too frequently turns your aggression into noise. They'll wait with strong hands and trap you. Bluffing too rarely makes you transparent. They'll fold when you bet and attack when you check. Balanced frequencies make your range appear dangerous in both directions. The math behind bluffing frequency connects to pot odds and value betting. In theory, if you bet the size of the pot, your opponent gets 2-to-1 odds on a call. That means they need to win 1 out of 3 times to break even. To make them indifferent between calling and folding, your bluffs should make up roughly 1/3 of your total betting range. If you bet smaller, your bluff ratio decreases. If you bet larger, it increases. These numbers aren't meant to be memorized, but they illustrate how math supports strategic balance. In practice, you adjust your frequency based on opponent type and table flow. Against tight players, you can increase your bluffing frequency because they overfold. Against loose players, you reduce it because they call too often. In other words, your opponents dictate how many bluffs are profitable, not just the cards or board. Board texture also influences frequency. On dry, ace-high boards, bluff often. Your range appears strong, and your opponent rarely connects. On wet, connected boards, bluff less. Each street should have its own frequency. You might continuation bet 60% of the time on favorable flops, but only double barrel 30% of the time on tricky turns. Finally, your table image ties the frequencies together. If you've been tight for a while, a sudden bluff will command more respect. If you've been caught bluffing recently, slow down. Opponents adjust based on perception, so you must adjust back. Bluffing frequency is a living thing, not a fixed rule. It evolves with every hand you play. Balanced bluffing creates harmony in your range. It ensures that when you bet, opponents never know whether to call or fold. The moment you become predictable, the math works against you. But when you blend bluffs and value seamlessly, you turn uncertainty into profit. Chapter 14. The Continuation Bet Bluff. Few plays define modern poker more than the continuation bet, often called a C-bet. It's a simple idea. You raise before the flop, miss the board, but still bet on the flop to represent strength. The continuation bet works because you often have the advantage in perceived range. You showed aggression pre-flop, so you're more likely to have big cards or pairs, while your opponent's range includes more weak and speculative hands. The power of the continuation bet comes from initiative. By betting, you maintain control of the hand and put pressure on your opponent. Most players miss the flop about 2/3 of the time, meaning your opponent likely didn't connect either. Your K-bet forces them to defend without clear information, creating instant fold equity. However, not every flop is a green light. On dry boards, like Ace-7-2 Rainbow or King-8-3, continuation bets succeed often because there are few strong combinations your opponent can have. These are your bread and butter spots. On wet boards, like Jack-10-9 with 2 suits, C-bets lose power because your opponent can easily have a piece of the texture. On such boards, either check or size your bet down to minimize risk. Position also shapes your success. In position, you can continuation bet wider because you'll see how opponents respond and can barrel again on scare cards. Out of position. C-bet. Selectively. When you get called, you're forced to act first on later streets, giving opponents the advantage of reaction. Bet sizing determines credibility. A small C-bet, around 1/3 of the pot, often works on dry boards by targeting weaker holdings. Larger bets around 1/2 to 2/3 of the pot are more appropriate on coordinated textures where you need stronger fold equity. Avoid huge C-bets unless you have the nuts or a very specific read. Overly large bets invite mistakes. Timing and table image also matter. If you've been C-betting every hand, opponents will start fighting back. Mix in occasional checks with strong hands to balance your range and trap them when they get bold. If you've been passive, a well-timed continuation bet will earn extra respect. A common mistake is caboting without a plan for later streets. Before betting, ask, "What will I do if I'm called?" You should know whether you'll barrel on certain turns or give up. Blindly firing flop bets without follow-up logic leads to chip leaks. Continuation bets are powerful because they combine logic, math, and psychology. You don't need a strong hand, you just need a believable story supported by range advantage and timing. Used wisely, they're not reckless aggression, they're structured control, disguised as confidence. Chapter 15. Double and Triple Barrel Bluffs. A bluff that spans multiple streets, betting the flop, turn, and sometimes river, is called a double or triple barrel. This is advanced poker. Multi-street bluffing demands logic, courage, and a precise understanding of how opponents think. When used correctly, it can win large pots without a showdown. When used poorly, it drains your stack. The key to barreling successfully is story consistency. Each bet must build on the last. Imagine you raise pre-flop, the flop comes king 8-4, and you continuation bet. Your opponent calls. The turn brings a queen. This card favors your perceived range. You can credibly represent hands like ace-queen, king-queen, or pocket queens. A second barrel makes sense because your story remains strong. If the turn brings a low connecting card, such as a 5, that improves your opponent's likely holdings, and continuing aggression would be less believable. The best turns for double barrels are scare cards, high cards that connect with your perceived range, or cards that complete draws you could logically have. Likewise, a good river for a triple barrel is one that adds more pressure, like an ace or a third flush card, representing hands that now beat much of your opponent's range. Barreling without improvement is not reckless if it aligns with math and psychology. Suppose you have Jack-10 suited on a Queen 9-3 flop. You continuation bet and get called. The turn is a king. That card completes your straight, or at least strongly represents it. Even if you don't have the straight, a second barrel makes sense because your story fits. You also block key hands your opponent might hold, such as ace-king or king-queen, adding credibility. Sizing is critical for multi-street bluffs. Your flop bet should leave room for a second or third barrel, without committing too much too early. A common structure is 1/3 pot on the flop, half pot on the turn, and 2/3 on the river. This progression mirrors the story of growing confidence. Overbetting early often ruins the narrative and limits your flexibility. You also need awareness of opponent type. Multi-street bluffs work best against players who think logically about ranges. Against calling stations who hate folding, even a perfect story fails. Against sharp players, barreling works when your line fits believable hands they know you could have. Discipline is what separates professionals from amateurs here. Every barrel you fire adds commitment. Before you bet the flop, you should already know which turns and rivers you'll continue on, and which cards will make you stop. That discipline protects you from ego-driven bluffs that spiral out of control. A well-timed triple barrel feels effortless because it flows naturally from the story of the hand. Each bet reinforces the illusion of strength. You're not betting randomly. You're writing a narrative your opponent doesn't want to challenge. In poker, the best stories win, and multi-street bluffs are storytelling at its finest. Chapter 16: Semi-Bluffing with Draws. Semi-bluffing is one of poker's most powerful tools. It combines pressure and potential, allowing you to win in two different ways. Either your opponent folds now, or you improve later and win at showdown. Because of that built-in safety net, semi-bluffs form the core of a strong aggressive strategy. A semi-bluff happens when you bet with a hand that isn't currently strong but has clear outs to improve. The most common examples are flush draws, straight draws, and combo draws. Suppose you have 10-9 of hearts, and the flop comes Jack of hearts, 7 of hearts, and 2 of clubs. You have an open-ended straight draw and a flush draw, a massive semi-bluff opportunity. If your opponent folds, you win immediately. If they call, you still have plenty of cards that can give you the best hand. The math supports this style of play. With 9 flush outs, your chance to hit by the river is about 35%. Add open-ended straight outs, and your equity can exceed 50%. That means even when called, your semi-bluff remains profitable over time. You're leveraging both fold equity and real equity. Semi-bluffing also builds balance in your strategy. If you only bet when you have made hands, opponents will stop paying you off. But when you mix in aggressive plays with strong draws, your range widens. Now when you bet, opponents can't easily tell whether you're value betting or semi-bluffing. This balance keeps your entire game unpredictable. Position enhances semi-bluffs. Acting last lets you see how your opponent responds before deciding whether to continue or take a free card. When you're out of position, semi-bluffing is riskier. You may face raises or be denied the chance to see the next card. Choose spots where position and stack depth give you flexibility. Bet sizing should match your story. On dry boards, small bets apply enough pressure to fold weaker hands. On coordinated textures, slightly larger bets protect your equity and discourage draws from continuing cheaply. Consistency in sizing between bluffs and value hands is crucial. It keeps your range disguised. The art of semi-bluffing lies in recognizing when your draw carries both potential and credibility. A semi-bluff on a wet board, where you could easily have strong hands, is powerful. A semi-bluff on a board that misses your range entirely is just wishful thinking. Ultimately, semi-bluffing turns potential into profit. It's where logic, math, and timing meet. When you bet with both a plan and equity behind you, you control the hand's pace while giving yourself multiple ways to win. In poker, that dual advantage is one of the greatest weapons you can hold. Chapter 17: Combo Draws and Equity. A combo draw is one of the most powerful tools in poker. It gives you multiple ways to win. A combo draw is any hand that has more than one draw at once, such as a straight draw and a flush draw together. These hands combine strong potential with fold equity, turning aggression into a profitable weapon. Imagine you have 10 of hearts and 9 of hearts on a flop of Queen of hearts, Jack of hearts, and 2 of clubs. You have an open-ended straight draw and a flush draw. That means any king, any 8, or any heart can improve your hand. You have 21 total outs, though some overlap slightly. Even with that adjustment, your equity is close to 50% against a single opponent. You can win by making your hand or by forcing a fold. Combo draws are ideal for semi-bluffing. When you bet or raise with this kind of hand, you apply pressure while still holding real potential. If your opponent folds, you collect the pot. If they call, you have a strong chance to improve on later streets. This combination of immediate and future equity creates confidence and keeps your strategy balanced. Position makes combo draws even stronger. Acting last gives you control over pot size and information. You can check behind when you miss or continue applying pressure when favorable cards appear. Out of position, it is better to play combo draws aggressively early in the hand. Doing so lets you define the action and avoid facing difficult decisions later. Stack depth also matters. The deeper the stacks, the more valuable your combo draws become. Deep stacks give you room to build large pots when you hit. They also create implied odds, meaning you can win much more than what is currently in the pot. With shallow stacks, you lose that flexibility, so it is often better to commit early when your draw has strong equity. Be careful not to overplay weak combo draws. For example, a low straight draw and small flush draw can still be dominated by higher cards. Always consider whether your draw could lose even when it improves. When you are drawing to the nuts, aggression is justified. When you are drawing to second best, control your pace. Combo draws sit at the intersection of math and psychology. They create natural bluffing opportunities while keeping your play mathematically sound. They allow you to bet with purpose, rather than fear. Mastering combo draws teaches you how to stay aggressive without becoming reckless. They are the perfect bridge between value and deception. Chapter 18. Reading Opponents. Bluffing is only as strong as your understanding of who you are. Bluffing. Every opponent is different. Some fold too easily. Others never let go. Reading these tendencies gives you the information you need to choose your spots wisely. The first skill in reading opponents is observation. Watch how they act before and after the flop. Notice who plays many hands and who plays few. Tight players wait for strong cards and often fold to aggression. Loose players call with wide ranges and chase draws. These tendencies shape your bluffing plan. Pay attention to timing and rhythm. Quick checks or small bets often show weakness. Long pauses before a call can signal doubt. Fast calls usually mean confidence or a draw that your opponent does not intend to fold. Online, timing tells can be just as useful. Instant bets may indicate a prepared decision, while hesitation can reveal discomfort. Body language matters in live games. Relaxed breathing, calm posture, and steady eye contact often show strength. Tension, fidgeting, or avoiding eye contact can reveal insecurity. However, be cautious. Experienced players sometimes fake tells to mislead you. Rely on patterns over time, not single moments. Learn to read bet sizing as language. A small bet can be an attempt to see the next card cheaply. A large bet might be designed to push you out. Some players always bet large with strong hands. Others do it with bluffs. The key is to identify consistency. Once you spot a pattern, you can predict behavior. Also note how opponents react to pressure. Some become defensive and fold quickly when facing aggression. Others become stubborn and call down to prove a point. Bluff the first type more often. Value bet the second type relentlessly. Good readers do not rely on a single clue. They combine many details into a complete picture. Table position, recent hands, emotional state, and stack size all provide context. You are not just playing cards, you are playing people. Finally, remember that observation works both ways. As you study others, they study you. Vary your pace, bet sizes, and reactions to avoid being predictable. A player who is hard to read is hard to beat. Bluffing is not only about telling your story. It is also about listening to theirs. Every opponent reveals something, if you pay attention. The better you listen, the more precisely you can strike. Chapter 19. Exploiting tight players. Tight players are some of the best bluffing targets in poker. They play few hands and fold often when faced with pressure. While disciplined and cautious, their predictability creates opportunities for well-timed aggression. Knowing how to exploit tight opponents helps you win many small pots and maintain control of the table. The first step is identification. Tight players fold frequently pre-flop, avoid marginal spots, and rarely bluff. They often sit patiently, waiting for premium hands like pocket aces or ace-king. Once in a hand, they tend to play straightforwardly. They bet strong when strong and check when weak. You can recognize them by long stretches of folding, followed by sudden activity only, with clear value hands. Bluffing tight players works because they fear risk. They prefer certainty and dislike guessing. When the board turns scary or the pot grows large, they often retreat unless holding a very strong hand. This gives you room to apply pressure. Simple continuation bets on ace-high or king-high boards can win many pots against them because they assume you always have it. Position enhances your advantage. When you act after a tight player, you see their hesitation before deciding. If they check to you on a board they should like, it often signals weakness. A small confident bet can take the pot immediately. Tight players also dislike calling bets out of position because it leaves them uncertain for future streets. You can exploit this by applying steady, believable aggression. Use storytelling through consistency. Bluff with the same sizing you use when holding real hands. If you continuation bet half the pot with top pair, use the same half pot size when bluffing. This prevents them from detecting patterns. Over time, they will fold to avoid difficult decisions. Avoid over-bluffing once you have been caught. Tight players remember mistakes and adjust by calling more often. After one exposed bluff, give them several hands of honest, value-heavy play before bluffing again. The goal is to re-establish credibility. Bluffing tight players is about measured pressure. You don't need large bets or dramatic moves. Small, well-timed aggression is enough. When they sense uncertainty, they protect their stacks by folding. This allows you to collect small pots repeatedly, slowly building profit without big showdowns. Against cautious players, aggression feels powerful because it targets their discomfort. Their discipline becomes your opportunity. By respecting their strengths while leveraging their fears, you can outmaneuver them quietly and efficiently. Chapter 20. Avoiding calling stations. While tight players are ideal bluffing targets, calling stations are the exact opposite. A calling station is a player who refuses to fold. They call with weak pairs, poor draws, or even complete air, simply because they hate giving up a hand. Bluffing them is almost always a losing effort. Success against calling stations comes not from bluffing, but from patience and value betting. The first rule is recognize them early. Calling stations enter many pots, and call frequently, but raise rarely. They chase long shot draws, call down with middle pairs, and rarely fold even when the board becomes dangerous. They often say things like, "I had to see it," after paying you off. Once you identify this type, shift your focus completely away from bluffing. Against calling stations, your strategy becomes value-first poker. Bet your strong hands for maximum value and avoid tricky plays. When you have top pair or better, keep betting. They will call with worse. When you miss the board, check or fold. Don't waste chips trying to make them fold, because they won't. Bet sizing is key. Use larger bets for value since they will call regardless of size. If you have a strong hand, charge them full price to see the next card. Save your smaller bets for spots where you're unsure. The beauty of this strategy is that calling stations pay you off without realizing they're helping you win. Patience is your greatest weapon. Many players grow frustrated when their bluffs fail against frequent callers. Emotion leads to chasing losses, which plays right into their hands. Stay calm. Let them keep calling, and eventually they'll call when you actually have the goods. Avoid complicated bluffs or multi-street aggression without equity. Even believable stories fail because calling stations simply don't fold. Their decisions are based on curiosity, not logic. The only way to win is to let the math and their bad habits do the work for you. It's also wise to tighten your range against these players. Since they call so often, you'll go to showdown frequently. Hands like top pair, top kicker, and strong overpairs perform well. Marginal hands lose value because there's little fold equity to protect them. When facing calling stations, the game becomes simple. Bet when you're strong. Check when you're weak. Collect the chips they donate, one call at a time. Over time, their unwillingness to fold becomes your steady income. Good poker means adapting. Bluffing loses its value when opponents don't fold, so shift to a style that profits from their stubbornness. Against calling stations, your patience and discipline earn more than any bluff ever could. Chapter 21: Image and Table Dynamics. Your table image is your poker reputation. It is how your opponents see you based on your past actions. Whether you are tight, aggressive, cautious, or unpredictable, that image shapes how others respond to your bets. Understanding and controlling your image is a key part of successful bluffing. Your image develops from patterns. If you have played few hands and shown down strong cards, opponents view you as tight and trustworthy. When you suddenly bluff, they are more likely to believe your story and fold. On the other hand, if you have been active, raising and betting constantly, your image becomes aggressive. In that case, even your value bets may be called more often. The first skill is awareness. Pay attention to how others are reacting to you. If your recent bluffs have worked easily, opponents may be tightening up. If your bets are being called more often, they may no longer trust your aggression. Adjusting to these shifts keeps you one step ahead. Table dynamics also influence your decisions. Every table has its own rhythm. Some games are quiet and cautious. Others are fast and volatile. Bluffing frequency should adapt to that energy. In a slow, careful game, small acts of aggression stand out and earn respect. In a wild game with constant raises, a bluff may go unnoticed or get called lightly. Your recent history also matters. Players remember what happened a few hands ago, far more than what happened an hour ago. If you were caught bluffing recently, your next attempt will have less credibility. Wait until time passes, or a new situation resets perceptions. Position ties into image as well. Bluffing from early position looks stronger because it represents tighter ranges. Bluffing from late position is more common, so it earns less automatic respect. However, by maintaining a steady balance of strong and weak hands in each position, you can blur that difference. Managing image also means mixing gears. After long stretches of tight play, add a few well-timed bluffs. After several aggressive or loose hands, slow down and show strength. This variety keeps opponents unsure of what you will do next. Unpredictability protects you. The best players use their image as a weapon. They know what their opponents believe about them and act accordingly. When everyone thinks you are solid, bluff more. When everyone thinks you are wild, value bet more. The goal is not to have one fixed identity, but to shift your reputation as the table evolves. Table dynamics and image are part of the same conversation. One is the mood of the game. The other is how you fit into it. Together they determine how believable your bluffs appear. When both align, even small bets can make big statements. Chapter 22: Over-Bluffing and Under-Bluffing. Finding balance is one of the hardest parts of poker. Bluff too often, and opponents start calling you down. Bluff too rarely, and they fold every time you bet. Both extremes are costly. Learning to recognize and correct these tendencies keeps your play sharp and unpredictable. Over-bluffing happens when aggression outweighs logic. You begin betting in situations where your story makes little sense. You may be frustrated, impatient, or chasing momentum. The result is frequent confrontation and unnecessary losses. The main sign of over-bluffing is when your bluffs are being called too easily. If your opponents seem comfortable calling light, it's time to slow down. To fix over-bluffing, return to structure. Choose bluffs that fit the board and your range. Ask yourself if the story is believable. Bluff less often and focus on semi-bluffs with real equity. This keeps your play aggressive, but grounded in logic. Under-bluffing is the opposite problem. You fold too often and only bet with real strength. At first, this feels safe, but over time it makes you predictable. Opponents fold every time you bet and attack when you check. You win small pots, but lose large ones. The fix is to add selective bluffs back into your range. Start with continuation bets on dry boards or small pressure bets in position. Build confidence slowly until your range feels balanced again. Balance is not about exact percentages. It is about keeping opponents uncertain. They should never know whether your bet means power or weakness. When you sense they are adjusting, adjust right back. Your emotional state also affects balance. Frustration leads to over-bluffing. Fear leads to under-bluffing. Recognizing those emotions helps you make corrections before mistakes multiply. A calm, patient mindset supports the right mix of aggression and control. Table texture matters too. In loose games, you need fewer bluffs because people call often. In tight games, you can bluff more frequently because folds come easily. The right ratio changes from one environment to another. Finally, review your sessions. Track how often your bluffs succeed and when they fail. Patterns will appear. You may discover that you overbluff on turn cards or underbluff after losing a big hand. Awareness leads to adjustment. Balanced bluffing is a conversation between logic and discipline. Too much aggression creates noise. Too little invites exploitation. The sweet spot lies in thoughtful moderation, where every bluff serves a purpose and every fold protects your edge. Chapter 23. Using blockers in bluffs. Blockers are one of the most overlooked parts of modern poker strategy. A blocker is a card in your hand that reduces the likelihood your opponent has a certain strong holding. When used correctly, blockers make bluffs safer and more logical. For example, holding the ace of hearts on a board with 3 hearts means your opponent cannot have the nut flush. You block that possibility. This gives you extra confidence to represent strength because you know the best hand is less likely to exist. Similarly, if the board shows king, queen, and jack, and you hold an ace, your opponent cannot have the nut straight. This information increases your bluffing opportunities. Blockers do not guarantee success. They simply adjust probabilities in your favor. Good bluffers use blockers to identify spots where opponents have fewer strong combinations to call with. This lets you apply pressure with lower risk. When you bluff, think about which hands your opponent could logically hold. If your cards remove many of those combinations, the bluff becomes stronger. For instance, if you bet on a board where a flush is possible, and you hold a high card of that suit, your opponent has fewer flushes in their range. You can use that to your advantage. Blockers also protect against reverse scenarios. Sometimes you should avoid bluffing when your blockers remove the very hands you want your opponent to fold. For example, if you hold the ace of hearts on a dry board and want to bluff a missed flush draw, your ace blocks those draws. That means your opponent is less likely to hold them, making your bluff less believable. Bluffing works best when the story fits the available hands. The most effective blockers come from high-value cards, like aces, kings, and queens. These cards often connect to the strongest possible combinations. Holding them narrows your opponent's range dramatically. Weak cards rarely function as strong blockers because they do not interact with the top of your opponent's possible hands. Position increases the value of blockers. When you act last, you can combine blocker knowledge with information from your opponent's betting patterns. If they check on a dangerous board that you partially block, a well-timed bluff can win the pot instantly. Out of position, you must rely more on logic and balance, since you cannot see how they would react first. Blockers turn bluffs from guesses into calculations. They add precision to your decision-making and make your story mathematically believable. Every time you bet, ask yourself what your hand says about your opponent's likely range. When the cards in your hand make their strong hands less probable, bluffing becomes not only creative but correct. Chapter 24. Example hands. Now let's put theory into practice. Seeing how bluffing and semi-bluffing play out step by step helps solidify the concepts we've studied so far. Below are several example hands that demonstrate key bluffing situations and how to think through them. Example 1. Semi-bluff flush draw. You hold king of clubs and 10 of clubs. The flop comes ace of clubs, 9 of hearts, and 4 of clubs. You have a flush draw with 2 overcards. Your opponent checks. You bet half the pot. This semi-bluff works for 2 reasons. First, you have fold equity. Your opponent may fold small pairs or weak aces. Second, you have strong potential to improve if called. Whether they fold now or call, you're playing a profitable situation. Example 2. Pure bluff on a dry board. You raise pre-flop with Queen-Jack suited, and the flop comes King-7-2 rainbow. You missed completely, but this board favors your range as the pre-flop raiser. Your opponent checks, and you continuation bet small, about 1/3 of the pot. Because your story is credible and their range is weak, they fold. You win the pot without needing a hand. Example 3. Multi-street bluff. You hold ace of spades and 10 of spades. The flop comes queen of hearts, 9 of clubs, and 3 of spades. You bet, and your opponent calls. The turn is the king of diamonds, a perfect scare card. You bet again, representing strong hands like ace-king or king-queen. When your opponent calls again, the river brings a low blank card. You follow through with a third barrel. The story fits perfectly, and your opponent folds a medium-strength hand. Your consistent narrative wins the pot. Example 4. Failed bluff against a calling station. You hold Jack-10 of hearts. The board runs out 8 of hearts, 9 of clubs, queen of diamonds, 2 of spades, and 3 of hearts. You missed your straight draw and decide to bluff the river. Your opponent, known for calling everything, calls again with bottom pair. You lose. This hand reinforces a simple rule: never bluff players who refuse to fold. Save your chips for better opportunities. Example 5. Using blockers for a bluff. You hold ace of hearts and king of diamonds on a board showing 10 of hearts, 5 of hearts, and 2 of hearts. You don't have a flush, but your ace of hearts blocks the nut flush. When your opponent checks, you make a calculated bet. Since they are less likely to have the best possible flush, your story appears strong, and they fold a weaker hand. Each of these hands shows a key lesson. Bluffing and semi-bluffing are not random acts of courage. They are structured, logical plays rooted in fold equity, position, and psychology. With practice, your bluffs will feel less like risks and more like precise tools used at the right moment. Chapter 25. Lesson Recap. Bluffing and semi-bluffing form the heartbeat of modern poker. They connect logic with emotion and transform every hand into a story. When done correctly, they create balance and power. When done poorly, they drain confidence and chips. This lesson brought structure to that chaos, showing how to bluff with reason instead of impulse. We began by defining bluffing. A bluff is any bet made with the intention of making your opponent fold a better hand. Bluffing protects your value hands and keeps your opponents uncertain. Without it, poker becomes predictable and mechanical. We explored the psychology of bluffing and learned that confidence, composure, and consistency build credibility. The calm player, not the loud one, tells the most believable story. Fold equity became the mathematical foundation of bluffing, showing how profit comes not only from winning at showdown, but from making others fold. We discussed planning each bluff. Every action should follow a purpose, from the flop to the river. Random aggression loses meaning, but structured aggression builds trust in your story. We distinguished pure bluffs from semi-bluffs. Pure bluffs rely only on fold equity. Semi-bluffs carry backup equity from draws and potential improvements. From there, we studied how to choose the right spots and read board texture. The best bluffing boards favor your perceived range and weaken your opponents. Dry textures, scare cards, and position create natural openings. Wet, connected boards punish careless aggression. We then explored advanced bluffing ideas, double barrels, triple barrels, and semi-bluffs with combo draws. These plays depend on consistency, sizing, and believable storytelling. Multi-street aggression succeeds only when every step logically connects to the one before it. You also learned how to tailor bluffs to your opponents. Tight players fold too often, which makes them prime bluffing targets. Loose players or calling stations refuse to fold and should be attacked only with real value. Observation and adaptation turn theory into profit. Finally, we connected everything with image and table dynamics. Bluffing works best when your reputation supports your story. Tight images win folds. Wild images win calls. Balancing those two identities keeps opponents guessing. In short, this lesson showed that bluffing is not about deception. It is about balance, logic, and timing. Every bluff should tell a believable story, backed by math and awareness. When you blend all of these elements, you move from random risk to strategic persuasion. That is the difference between a gambler and a professional. Chapter 26. Looking ahead to defending against bluffs. Every great bluffer eventually faces an opponent who tries to turn the tables. The next skill in your poker development is learning to spot and counter bluffs. Defense is as important as offense. Knowing how to recognize false aggression protects your chips and punishes players who rely too heavily on pressure. In the next lesson, we will study the art of calling down. You will learn how to detect bluffing frequencies that are too high, and how to read bet patterns that don't make sense. We will also explore range-based thinking, how to compare the story your opponent is telling with the possible hands they could realistically have. You will see how to identify bluff-heavy spots based on board texture, timing, and bet sizing. When opponents over-represent their strength, you can call confidently, with medium hands that usually fold. Defense is not about stubbornness. It is about logic and awareness. We will also examine emotional control from the opposite side. Staying calm while facing big bets allows you to think clearly. Panicking or rushing decisions is how players give up pots that belong to them. Recognizing bluffing behavior, fast bets, inconsistent sizing, and nervous speech gives you the advantage. Finally, you will learn to adjust your own image to discourage future bluffs. When opponents realize you can't be bullied, they stop trying. This balance between bluffing and defense creates complete strategic harmony. Lesson 7 taught you how to bluff with control. Lesson 8 will teach you how to call with confidence. Together, they form the full circle of poker mastery: pressure and resistance, attack and defense, courage and patience.